Hello everybody. I already did an intro, but I just pushed a button on accident, so it started over. So I might just go with this. I think I will. My name is Dr. Cheryl Meyer. I'm reading this book on Evelyn Underhill, Mysticism, the nature and development of spiritual consciousness. You can just start right here. We're on the chapter on magic and mysticism. She was Anglican was her faith practice, but she's well studied in all these other faiths, and I mean, it's just such an amazing book. It's from 1910, so it's free copyright, and so I'm reading it here while the sun's setting. All right, let's just go. So this chapter is on mysticism and magic, and there's more information in the description, and I have a playlist, so if you want to start in the other videos you can, or just start here. It works to start here, you'll see. Just consider it like, divine providence that you got here in this moment. So the first lesson of the would-be magus is self-mastery. Magus. That's a Greek word. It actually means like powerful. By means of persevering and gradual athletics, says Eliphas Levi, the powers, and he's a writer of this book on Kabbalah that she's talking about, right? I never encourage occultism and going into any of that. Wow, it's so beautiful where I am. And it smells like sage. Okay. Watch the last video and I talk about who he is. Anyway, by means of preserving and gradual athletics, says Eliphas Levi, the powers of the body can be developed to an amazing extent. It is the same with the powers of the soul. Would you govern yourself and others? Learn how to will. How may one learn how to will? This is the first secret of magical initiation, and it was to make the foundation of this secret thoroughly understood that the antique keepers of the mysteries surrounded the approach to the sanctuary with so many terrors and illusions. They did not believe in a will until it had given its proofs. Just like you wouldn't just marry someone that you just met. Same thing. I look... Anyway. Hi. I'm in the dark right now, but that's okay. I'll be in the light later. I don't know if I said my name's Dr. Cheryl Meyer. I'm a psychologist, my day job. They did not believe in a will until it had given its proofs, and they were right. Strength cannot prove itself except by conquest. Idleness and negligence are the enemies of the will. And this is the reason why all religions have multiplied their practices and made their cults difficult and minute. The more trouble one gives oneself for an idea, the more power one acquires in regard to that idea. Think of people trying to get in fraternities and sororities. They would do these studies with us in graduate school and show us, like, if someone worked harder to get in a fraternity, they valued it more, or a sorority, If something seems like it's hard to get, like, how they would create a scarcity with diamonds and stuff. Anyway, hence the power of religions resides entirely in the inflexible will of those who practice them. In its essence, then, magical initiation is a traditional form of mental discipline, strengthening and focusing the will. By it, some of those powers of apprehension which lie below the threshold of ordinary consciousness are liberated and enabled to report their discoveries to the active and sentient mind. So I know this man, John Butler, just so you can understand this, who has said he's meditated twice a day for let's say an hour a day for 60 years now. He's like 80 something, maybe 80. And so if you've learned how to quiet your mind and not give your attention to all its ramblings or all the outer senses or all the problems that are going on around you, then you learn to give less weight to your thoughts, and it frees your mind to be in the presence, to be in, and we came from presence, from divine oneness, from God, from divine love. In the beginning, it was tohu va vohu in Hebrew, but it's like formless and void, was, anyway, we come from the oneness into this world, and when we can go into that quiet place, be still and know that I am God, then it's a discipline that this guy has learned to quiet his mind. And you'll see, if you ever watch his videos, you just want to be around him because he's so deeply present. You just feel not judged. Look at the sun. Anyway, she'll talk more about it, I'm sure. In its essence, then, magical initiation is a traditional form of mental discipline strengthening and focusing the will. By it, some of those powers of apprehension which lie below the threshold of ordinary consciousness are liberated and enabled to report their discoveries to the active and sentient mind. This discipline, like that of the religious life, consists partly in physical austerities and a deliberate divorce from the world, partly in the cultivation of willpower, but largely in a yielding of the mind to the influences of suggestions, which have been selected and accumulated in the course of ages because of their power over that imagination which Eliphas Levi calls, quote, the eye of the soul. There is nothing supernatural about it. Like the more arduous, more disinterested self-training of the mystic, it is character building with an object conducted upon an heroic scale. In magic, quote, the will to know is the center round which the personality is rearranged. As in mysticism, subconscious factors are dragged from the hiddenness to form part of that personality. The uprushes of thought, the abrupt intuitions which reach us from the subliminal region are developed, ordered, and controlled by the rhythms and symbols which have become traditional because the experience of centuries has proved, though it cannot explain, their efficacy. So it can't explain it. You can't put it in words. What you observe in the oneness. You can, but they're just signposts. It's just like if you'd been on the moon and no one else had been there, how do you describe lack of gravity unless someone experiences lack of gravity? You could say we float. There are words you can use, but it's not expressing the whole thing. The fundamental principle, says A.E. Waite, speaking of occult evocations, was in the exercise of a certain occult force resident in the magus and strenuously exerted for the establishment of such a correspondence between two planes of nature as would effect his desired end. I don't know if I read this part in the other part that I had to start over on. The first lesson of the would-be magus is self-mastery. Yes, I did. Okay. I read that for us. I only went a couple minutes, but then... Okay. The fundamental principle, says A.E. Waite, speaking of occult evocations, was in the exercise of certain occult force residents in the magus and strenuously exerted for the establishment of such a correspondence between two planes of nature as would effect his desired end. This exertion was termed the evocation, conjuration, or calling of the spirit, but that which in reality was raised was the energy of the inner man. Tremendously developed and exalted by combined will and aspiration, this energy germinated by sheer force a new intellectual faculty of sensible psychological perception. Maybe she's describing what John Butler has. To assist and stimulate this energy into more powerful possible operation, artificial means were almost invariably used. The synthesis of these methods and processes were called ceremonial magic, which in effect was a tremendous forcing house of the latent faculties of man's spiritual nature. So she's reading from a book called The Occult Sciences. I don't think she's going to go too far into this. This is the psychological explanation of those apparently absurd rituals of preparation, doctrines of signs and numbers, pentacles, charms, angelical names, and the power of the word, and all the rest which go to make up ceremonial magic. The power of such artifices is known amongst the Indian, from India, mystics, who, recognizing in the mantra or occult and rhythmic formula, consciously held and repeated, an invaluable help to the attainment of the true ecstatic states, are not ashamed to borrow them from the magicians. So too the modern American schools of mental healing and new thought, which she says not to follow earlier, that they're heresies, recommend concentration upon a carefully selected word as the starting point of efficacious meditation. Now you can do that with the centering prayer with Jesus and all that, but anyway, I'll keep reading. The fact of the enormous psychical effect of certain verbal combinations when allowed to dominate the field of consciousness is the practical reason of that need of a formal liturgy, which is felt by nearly every great religion. For religion, on its ceremonial side, is always largely magical. And so when we're doing ceremonies, at our churches, like the old way from more than 2,000 years, because even the church patterned it off of like the Jewish tradition before that. It too seeks by artificial means to stimulate latent energies. The true magic word or spell is untranslatable because its power resides only partially in that outward sense which is apprehended by the reason, but chiefly in the rhythm which is addressed to the subliminal mind. Did the Catholic Church choose to acknowledge a law long known to the adepts of magic? She has here an explanation of that instinct, which has caused her to cling so strenuously to a Latin liturgy, much of whose amazing and truly magical power would evaporate were it translated into the vulgar tongue. They use like High English and Latin because it if someone just said, "Give us bread today," instead of speaking in the high language. Hold on, I gotta put my jacket on. They wouldn't necessarily get in that place of quietude or of ceremony, which is necessary to kind of, let me explain it really quickly to you in a very quick and easy way, right? Is just, at the sun setting. Oh, so pretty. It's just a glow right now. The sun's actually behind, I think, now. I read a book called How to Draw Using the Right Side of Your Brain. I only read the first 4 chapters, and if I was going to edit this, which I hope not to, I could put in, I have it on my wallet, I think. Anyway, I have this Van Gogh picture. And it was like my 4th drawing ever, or 3rd. And let me see if it's in here. No, I ought to keep it, actually. Anyway, it's called At Eternity's Gate. And I never knew I could draw. But what she said was, if you turn your sketchbook upside down and turn Van Gogh's drawing that I was just looking at, I wasn't tracing or anything, I was looking at it, and you draw your drawing upside down, it turns off, the left side of your brain is logical, and so you turn off your logical brain. And when you do that, your artistic brain is on, because you're not labeling, you're not saying, this is a finger that I'm drawing, you have no idea what you're drawing. And so if you did know what you were drawing, you're like, okay, I'm drawing a kite, I'm drawing a tree. You draw your idea of a tree. You don't draw what you're seeing. When you turn it upside down, it shuts down your logical brain, And so you're more entering into the moment, and you're just drawing what you're seeing, and nothing's editing really, and nothing's labeling it. You're just seeing and drawing. And so it's just like that with a mystic experience. You know, C.S. Lewis talks a lot about it. We have it in a church bulletin, you know, every week. It says C.S. Lewis, I don't read it, but I have before. It says, he said, you know, the best church ceremony is one in which you disappear into it. You know the dance so well that you're participating in the dance. You're not thinking about, okay, step one, you know, step right, left, do-si-do, you know, swing around your partner. I don't know, you know, all that stuff, you know, waltz, step together, step, all that stuff. You're not having to think about any of that stuff. You're just, you're in the dance, you're experiencing it. You're experiencing this mystic union with God in miniature every time. You know, you'd think of church a lot different if you knew that this is what's going on. I think of church a lot different now that I do know that that's what's going on. And so, let's go back to this. So what she's talking about is not, she's like, don't make fun of magic because you're actually participating in magic every time you go to church. Even people that don't go to a high church, they go and they'll get their coffee before church or whatever, and then they'll do the worship, and you know, they'll warm up with these songs, and then this person will come out, and then this person will come out, and then someone will read something, and then someone will preach something, and then they'll do announcements or whatever. You know, there's still a process, and then part of that process sometimes is people going out to lunch, or you know, or going somewhere to get lunch with friends or whatever, you know. And so there's all these rituals involved in it that you're participating in. You know, this might be why, like, the Starbucks line is so long, is because we're spiritual beings. And so if we don't have the religious rituals that help us align with God, then we make up our own, where it's like, I'm going to listen to music for half an hour. I'm going to go get my coffee and make it this, instead of like incense burning up to the Lord, it's like a hot steaming cup, you know. And I'm not saying it's wrong to drink coffee. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, you know, watch a baseball player if he doesn't go through his rituals, or before he goes and plays a major league game, you know. Some of them aren't like that. All these figures and let's go back. The true magic word or spell is untranslatable because its power resides only partially in that outward sense, which is apprehended by the reason, but chiefly in the rhythm, which is addressed to the subliminal mind. Did the Catholic Church choose to acknowledge a law long known to the adepts of magic? She has here an explanation of that instinct, which has caused her to cling so strenuously to a Latin liturgy, much of whose amazing and truly magical power, like I already read this, would evaporate were it translated into the vulgar tongue. Symbols, religious and other, and symbolic acts which appear meaningless when judged by the intellect alone, perform a similar office. They express the deep-seated instinct of the human mind that it must have a focus on which to concentrate its volitional powers. If those powers are to be brought to their highest state of efficiency, the nature of the focus matters little, its office matters much. I give a short extract from the Ritual de la Haute Magique, which sufficiently exhibits Levy's opinion on this subject. Many of its phrases might be fresh from the pen of the newest American psychologist, in 1910 newest, you know. All these figures and acts analogous to them, all these dispositions of numbers and of characters, i.e. sacred words, charms, pentacles, etc., are, as we have said, but instruments for the education of the will, of which they fix and determine the habits. You know, your actions determine your habits, and your habits, your character, and your character, something else, I forgot how that goes. I know this guy that memorized it says it in like almost all of his videos. Of which they fix and determine the habits. They serve also to concentrate in action all the powers of the human soul, and to strengthen the creative power of the imagination. A practice, even though it be superstitious and foolish, may be efficacious because it is a realization of the will. Okay, so even if it's superstitious and foolish, it may have efficacy because, you know, it's like if you did 500 sit-ups every day, you know, in order for you to feel strong for something that you're going to do next, you actually did those sit-ups. So your stomach did get strong, you know. Or if you focused like what John Butler was doing, 1 hour in the morning, I don't know if it's an hour, and an hour at night, you practiced directing your will to, he does the Jesus prayer, you know, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. You directed your thoughts to that. And so I did it just one day, like he suggested. And I felt so free from my thoughts. Now I've been doing a different meditation practice. But it makes you just think, it's just kind of like, okay, it's kind of like when someone dies, right? Or someone lives after a tragic accident and they're fine, they're going to be okay, they're going to recover. You know, it's like all these other things, people just talking about nothing around you seem so paltry and so meaningless and so you can't even get into them, you know. That's what happens when you learn how to meditate. You access your higher mind and you're quieting down this lower mind, and you see what, you know, it's just like if you stop watching TV for a year, you're just going to be like, why would I ever go back to TV? That just sucked my life away, you know? You develop a different perspective. So it is a training of your will. And even if it's done for stupid reasons and not good reasons, those people still have their will trained, you know? And so it's kind of like, you know, Gandalf and Saruman in The Lord of the Rings, you know, they were both good wizards, and then Saruman turned bad and was used, you know, by the evil forces. But both had trained their will, you know. It's unfortunate, obviously, you know, when people turn bad. All these, okay, so let's go back to where we were. They serve also to concentrate in action all the powers of the human soul, and to strengthen the creative power of the imagination. A practice, even though it be superstitious and foolish, may be efficacious because it is a realization of the will. We laugh at the poor woman who denies herself a hapworth of milk in the morning, that she may take a little candle to burn upon the magic triangle in some chapel. But those who laugh are ignorant, and the poor woman does not pay too dearly for the courage and resignation which she thus obtains. The wise pass proudly by, shrugging their shoulders. They attack superstition with a clamor which shakes the world, and what happens? The houses which they build fall down, and their debris are resold to the providers and purchasers of the little candles, who willingly allow it to be said that their power is at an end, since they know that their reign is eternal. Oh, okay, so I'm thinking back then, it's like they save their money and don't spend it on the milk in the morning, and then they can buy a candle to pray for someone's soul at church. I think that's what she's talking about. I'm not sure. Magic symbols, therefore, from penny candles to Solomon's seal, fall in modern technical language into two classes. The first contains instruments of self-suggestion, exaltation, and will direction. To this belong all spells, charms, rituals, perfumes, from the magician's vervain wreath to the youth, to quote, the youth, health, strength, which the student of New Thought repeats when she is brushing her hair in the morning. Oh, so she's saying youth, health, strength. Interesting. The second class contains autoscopes, i.e. material objects which focus and express the subconscious perceptions of the operator. The dowser's divining rod, fortune teller's cards, and crystal gazer's ball are characteristic examples. Both kinds are rendered necessary rather by the disabilities of the human than by the peculiarities of the superhuman plane. And the great adept, like the great saint, may attain heights at which he can entirely dispense with these outward and visible signs. Quote, ceremonies being, as we have said, artificial methods of creating certain habits of the will, they cease to be necessary when these habits become fixed. End quote. This is a point at which the history of magic lights up for us certain peculiarities in the history of mysticism. These facts, now commonplace of psychology, have been known and used by students of magic for countless generations. Those who decry the philosophy because of the apparent absurdity of its symbols and ceremonies should remember that the embraces, gestures, grimaces, and other ritual acts by which we all concentrate, liberate, or express love, wrath, or enthusiasm will ill endure the cold, revealing light of a strictly rational inquiry. And so, if you have someone like Spock from the old Star Wars or Star Trek, who's just logical, he would look at people like hugging as like, that's weird. Why are you doing that? Or like cheering at a football game or something as irrational, weird. Why are you going through that ritual? Or why are you doing these cheers? I used to be a cheerleader. It's like, why are you doing these cheers? And it's like repeating these cheers. Let's go, LETSGO, let's go. You get everybody excited, and you're encouraging the players to do their very best, to be excellent, and all of the fans are cheering on, them to keep going, keep at it, keep doing your best. We're behind you, Okay, so the logical brain would be like, why would you do any of that stuff, To the two dogmas of the, quote, astrolight, or universal agent, and the, quote, power of the will. So there's the two dogmas, the astrolight and the power of the will, which I talked about a little bit in the last video. There is to be added a third, the doctrine of analogy, or implicit correspondence between appearance and reality, the microcosm of man and the macrocosm of the universe, the seen and the unseen worlds. In this, occultism finds the basis of all its transcendental speculations. Quod superius sicut quod inferius. She doesn't translate the Latin, but it's something superior compared to something inferior. I don't know. I took Greek, not Latin. The first words of that emerald table, which was once attributed to Hermes Trismegistus himself, is an axiom which must be agreeable to all Platonists. She's going back to the people of Plato, Platonists. It plays an enormous part in the theory of mysticism. Well, if it plays an enormous part, and she doesn't say what it is in English, someone that speaks Latin, write it down in our comments for us. Thank you. In the theory of mysticism, which has always assumed that the path of the individual soul towards loving union with the absolute. Okay, so here she's differing from occultism, okay, is the path of the mystic the path of the individual soul towards loving union with the absolute is strictly analogous with the path on which the universe moves to its consummation in God. Wow, that's amazing. So the universe is making the same movement. Just like St. Paul said, the universe groans, And I heard this the other day, and this was like the first time I'd heard it. This was just like a couple days ago, where this bishop that was teaching was saying that, he got this idea, and I'm sure he read it too, but that when Adam and Eve fell, they brought the earth down, and he had verses to back that up, that they brought the earth is now groaning, waiting to be restored. I could talk a long time about that, but I'm not gonna. The notion of analogy ultimately determines the religious concepts of every race and resembles the verities of faith in the breadth of its application, for it embraces alike the appearances of the visible world, which thus become the mirrors of the invisible, the symbols of religion, the tiresome arguments of Butler's analogy, the sublime allegories of the Kabbalah and the spiritual alchemists, and that childish doctrine of signatures on which much of medieval science was built. I don't know that one, the last one. Analogy, says Levy, is the last word of science and the word of faith, and the first word of faith, right? It's like this. The sole possible mediator between the visible and the invisible, between the finite and the infinite. Here magic clearly defines her own limitations, stepping incautiously from the useful to the universal, and laying down a doctrine which no mystic could accept, which carried to its logical conclusion, would turn the adventure of the infinite into a guessing game. Analogy, he says again, and this time perhaps with more propriety, is the key of all the secrets of nature. This is why religions seem to be written in the heavens and in all nature. Maybe that's why I'm always wanting to come out to nature when I read this, The ocean's just that way. If I stood up on this rock, maybe we could see it. This is why religions seem to be written in the heavens and in all nature. This must be so, for the work of God is the book of God, and in that which he writes, one should see the expression of his thought and consequently of his being, since we conceive of him only as supreme thought. Here we have a hint of that idealistic element which is implicit in occultism, as even the wildest heresies retain traces of the truths which they pervert. Did you hear that? So here we have a hint of the idealistic element which is implicit in occultism. So there is an idealistic element within it. As even the wildest heresies retain traces of the truths which they pervert. And so it's kind of like someone saying, hey, there is such a thing called love and commitment and fidelity and integrity and staying with someone and being joined and never parting until death do us part. There's that beauty, and someone pretending to have that just because they want the spoils of that. I'll just keep it vague in case there are kids, and saying it's the same thing. Well, the intimacy of two people holding each other and whatever looks like union and is a kind of union, but it's not the same as people who have been committed to each other for 20 years or 40 years and have learned to love each other in all the ups and downs and helped each other in all the ups and downs and cherished each other and all those kinds of things. It's not the same. And so it's a perversion, it's a pretending. And so it is when people get high on some kind of substance, They get that high euphoric feeling that you get when you have your heart expanded full of love towards someone or in nature or something, And it's like you're stealing that, but what goes up must go down, And then you keep wanting a more and more high, and your resources go off to chase that, And you teach yourself to keep looking for bodily pleasures instead of learning how to be deeply present. It's too slow for you to do that. It's not appealing for you because your brain, you found it a quicker way that it's just like someone who builds themselves up with their work and feels really important. And it's like, but what are you creating? Do you know what I mean? If you're creating things that tear people down and you're just, or tear down their bodies or whatever, and you're just making a lot of money off of that, then to what end? You know what I mean? Like, how important ought you feel? Just because you made a lot of money off of that, you know, and you can buy fancy things. So they do retain traces of the truth, which they pervert. The argument by analogy is carried by the occultist to lengths which can hardly be set down in this place. Armed with this torch, they explore the darkest, most terrible mysteries of life, and do not hesitate to cast the grotesque shadows of these mysteries upon the unseen world. The principle of correspondence is no doubt a sound one, so long as it works within reasonable limits. It was admitted into the system of the Kabbalah, though that astute philosophy was far from giving to it the importance which it assumes in Hermetic science. It has been accepted eagerly by many of the mystics. Boheme and Swedenborg gladly availed themselves of its method in presenting their intuitions to the world. I gotta get the flashlight, it's getting dark. It doesn't look it by this, but I brought my jacket this time, but still it's cold. We'll see. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for being here. Like this. Take a moment to like this. You know, if I'm taking out my free time to read this for us, you know, my channel is not monetized or anything yet. I don't know if it ever will be. And so right now I'm just doing it for the love of sharing knowledge, you know. I mean, I hope I always do it for that. That's what I always hope, but okay, here it is. So like it and share and comment, because a bunch of comments, even if you put a quote from this, or, you know, put your favorite quote in general, YouTube doesn't care. They just think that people are engaging with the video if they're quoting something. I often will say that just because lots of people don't want to go to a psychologist and be like, I have this question about a friend of mine. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I don't make excuses. Like, write comments. You can do that while I'm speaking. Most of you can. It is implicitly acknowledged by thinkers of innumerable other schools. Its influence permeates the best periods of literature. Sir Thomas Browne spoke for more than himself when he said in a well-known passage of the Religio Medici, here's a quote: "The severe schools shall never laugh me out of the philosophy of Hermes Trismegistus." People pronounce it different ways, so I've heard it Trismegistus, Trismegistus. Okay, so the severe schools shall never laugh me out of the philosophy of Hermes, and she has Trismegistus in the parentheses. That this visible world is but a picture of the invisible, wherein, as in a portrait, things are not truly, but in equivocal shapes, and as they counterfeit some real substance of that invisible framework. Okay, and so if you have a painting of Mr. Darcy in the book Pride and Prejudice, you know, that's an analogy inside of an analogy, but it's like it would be if you just have a painting at you know, Blenheim Palace or something of an actual person. It's not the actual person you're seeing, but you are seeing its representation. And so Plato says that all the time, that these things that we're experiencing, we're in the shadowlands. The real forms are in heaven, you know. Anyway, as they counterfeit some real substance in that invisible framework, end quote. Such a sense of analogy, whatever the severe schools may say, is the foundation of every perfect work of art. Intuitive perception of the hidden analogies of things, says Hazlitt, an English novelist, or, as it may be called, his instinct of the imagination, is perhaps what stamps the character of genius on the productions of art more than any other circumstance. The central doctrine of magic may now be summed up thus. 1. That a supersensible and real cosmic medium exists, which interpenetrates, influences, and supports the tangible and apparent world, and is amenable to the categories both of philosophy and of physics. 2. That there is an established analogy and equilibrium between the real and the unseen world, and the illusory manifestations which we call the world of sense. I just gotta look around because I'm actually in wild lands, and there are mountain lions and stuff like that. I don't want to, and coyotes. So I'm just gonna put my backpack on so I am ready to go. If we need to walk, we will walk. I saw a bobcat here before, not right here, down below this, not too far away. All right. Don't be scared for me, because if something happened, you wouldn't see this video because I wouldn't have been there to post it. That's the logic I'll let you use, right? I'll encourage you to use. 3. That this analogy may be discerned and the equilibrium controlled by the disciplined will of man, which thus becomes master of itself and of fate. That this analogy may be discerned and this equilibrium controlled by the disciplined will of man, which thus becomes master of itself and of fate. Wow, instead of it just playing on you being master of your fate, I mean, you're still yielding to God. Anyway, we must now examine in more detail the third of these propositions, that which ascribes abnormal powers to the educated and disciplined will. For this assumption lies at the root of all magical practices, alike of the oldest and the newest schools. Magical operations, says Eliphas Levi, are the exercise of a power which is natural but superior to the ordinary powers of nature. They are the result of a science and of habits which exalt the human will above its usual limits. This power of the will is daily gaining recognition in the camps of science as the chief factor in religion and in therapeutics, the healing of the body and the healing of the soul, like psychology, like going to therapy improves your life, I mean, if you're working with a good psychologist or therapist, but and healing of the soul. For our most advanced theories on these subjects are little more than the old wine of magic in new bottles. Wow, who knew? The accredited psychological theory of religious experience, for instance, rests upon the hypothesis that by self-suggestion, by a deliberate cultivation of the will to believe, and similar means, it is possible to shift the threshold of consciousness and to exhibit those supernormal perceptions which are variously attributed to inspiration and to disease. So some people think that they have a disease, and they get a disease because, if you stress out your body all the time, your cells break down, And so if you're constantly in anxiety, Jesus says, do not worry about tomorrow, for today has enough worries of itself, and don't worry about your clothes and what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear. Seek first the kingdom of God. He teaches this stuff so that your cells don't break down. But other people practice their will, and they practice all these other things and rituals, to get all hyped, and maybe their bodies become healthier for a while or whatever, but And other people say, oh, I have this disease, but really they've been talking horribly to themselves for 40 years and just repeating messages they learned in childhood that weren't true about their worth, about who they were, and all sorts of things. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't looking right at the camera, so I forget that it's this way. I'm just looking straight at. Anyway. This is exactly what ceremonial magic professes in milder and more picturesque language to do for her initiates, and all such deliberate processes of conversion are, on their psychological side, the results of an involuntary obedience to the laws of Hermetic science. The ancient occultists owed much of their power and also of their evil reputation to the fact that they were psychologists before their time. Wow. Recipes for the alteration and exaltation of personality and for the enhancement of willpower, the artificial production of photisms, automatisms, and ecstasy with an opening up of the subliminal field which accompanies these phenomena, concealed from the profane by a mass of confusing allegories and verbiage, form the backbone of all genuine occult rituals. Their authors were perfectly aware that the ceremonial magic has no objective importance, but depends solely on its effect upon the operator's mind. In order that this effect might be enhanced, it was given an atmosphere of sanctity and mystery. Its rules were strict, its higher rites difficult of attainment. It constituted at once a test of the student's earnestness and a veil which guarded the sanctuary from the profane. The long and difficult preparations, majestic phrases, and strange ceremonies of an evocation had power not over the spirit of the dead, but over the consciousness of the living, who was thus caught up from the world of sense to a new plane of perception. For him, not for unknown powers, were these splendors and these arts displayed. The rationale of the evocation of an angel consists not in summoning spirits from afar, but in opening the operator's eyes upon angels who are always there. Wow, that's something. Because, I mean, even Jesus says we have a guardian angel. Their angel, he was talking about little children, their angel sits next to the throne of God, for little children. When the spiritual exaltation of the magus has been accomplished by various ceremonial practices, the spirit is, in magical language, compelled to appear. That is to say, the operator has passed into a condition which it would be as impossible for a spirit to remain invisible to him as for an ordinary mortal to conceal itself from our common sight without any intervening shelter in the blaze of a noonday sun. Thus, the whole education of the genuine occult student tends to awaken in him a new view and a new attitude. It adjusts the machinery of his cinematograph to the registration of new intervals in the stream of things which passed it by before, and thus introduces new elements into the picture by which ordinary men are content to know and judge their universe. Hello. Sorry, did I scare you? You scared me. I'm reading a book. In the end, says Steiner, Rudolf Steiner? I don't know. In the end, says Steiner, with the usual exaggeration of the professional occultist, yes, I'm sure it's that, it all resolves itself into the fact that man ordinarily carries body, soul, and spirit about with him, yet is conscious only of the body, not of the soul and spirit, and that the student attains to a similar consciousness of soul and spirit also. So much for the principles which govern occult education, magic therapeutics, or as it is now called, mental healing, is but the application of these principles upon another plane. It results first from a view of humanity which sees a difference only of degree. between disease of body and of soul, and can state seriously and in good faith that, quote, moral maladies are more contagious than physical, and there are some triumphs of infatuation and fashion which are comparable to leprosy or cholera. All right. Secondly, it is worked by that enhancement of willpower that the ability to alter and control weaker forms of life, which we have seen to be the reward of the occult discipline. All the power of the occult healer lies in his conscious will, and all his art consists in producing faith in the patient. Well, I think she's describing like a placebo effect here. This simple truth was in the possession of the Magi at a time when church and state saw no third course between the burning or beatification of its practitioners. So they didn't see a third course, but between beatifying someone, calling someone a saint, or burning them at the stake because they called them, that's bad. Anyway, now under the polite names of beatification of its practitioners, now under the polite names of mental hygiene, suggestion, and therapeutics, it is steadily advancing to the front rank of the medical shibboleths. Yet it is advancing to the front rank of Yet it is still the same magic art which has been employed for centuries with varying ritual accompaniments by the adepts of occult science. Okay, I want to go like 4 more minutes and then I'll walk with you and we can talk for the last. Because I had 4 minutes before this already recorded, but I'm not going to use it, I don't think. The methods of Brother Hilarion Tissot, who is described as curing lunacy and crime by the, quote, unconscious use of the magnetism of Paracelsus, who attributed his cases either to disorder of the will or to the perverse influence of external wills, and would, quote, regard all crimes as acts of madness and treat the wicked as diseased, anticipated the discoveries of Charcot and Genet. But in spite of the consistent employment by all the great adepts of their occult or supernormal power in the healing and the prevention of disease, on its philosophic side, magic, like Christianity, combines a practical policy of pity for the maimed, halt, and blind with a creed of suffering and renunciation. Here it joins hands with mysticism and proclaims its belief in pain as the schoolmaster of every spirit which desires to transcend the life of sense. Eliphas Levi, whilst advising the initiate whose conscious will has reached its full strength to employ his powers in the alleviation of pain and prolongation of life, laughs at the student who seeks in magic a method of escaping suffering or satisfying his own selfish desires. None, he says, knows better than the true magician that suffering is of the essence of the world plan. Great. None, he says, knows better than the true magician that suffering is of the essence of the world plan. Only those who face it truly live. Alas for the man who will not suffer. It's a quote. Alas for the man who will not suffer. He will be crushed by griefs. End quote. Again, perhaps his finest utterance, quote, to learn to suffer and to learn to die, this is the gymnastic of eternity, the novitiate of immortal life. Wow. That's like Jesus said, take up your cross daily and follow me. You have to die in this way of dying to your flesh, of dying to trying to avoid pain through these fake magic ways, or, calling on shortcuts. Like a fakir, in India, can turn off their pain receptors by like a hypnosis, and it looks like, they're putting swords through them or whatever. And they can do all these things that look like magic to us because they've trained their will in certain ways. But to what end? so that they can make money off of people. You know, you're not going for union with the absolute, with divine love, you know. Here then is the pure theory of magic. It is seen at its best in Eliphas Levi's work, because he was, in some respects, greater than the system which he preached. Towards the close of his life, the defective and limited nature of that system became clear to him, and in his latest writings he makes no secret of this fact. The chief of these defects is the peculiar temper of mind and cold intellectual arrogance, the intensely individual point of view which occult studies seem to induce by their conscious quest of exclusive power and knowledge, their implicit neglect of love. At bottom, every student of occultism is striving towards a point at which he may be able to, quote, touch the button and rely on transcendental world, quote, springing to do the rest. Rely on the transcendental world to springing to do the rest. In this hard-earned acquirement of power over the many, he tends to forget the one, right? We're talking about God here. Oh, okay. All right, I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. So in forgetting, anyway, they lose their mandate, you know. If your mandate, and I love how there's this woman named Latoya Okia. I love how she said it the other day. I was in a class of hers, and she said, you know, she's like, always test, you know, Jesus says test the spirits, test 3 times, you know, you'll know them by their fruit. They will keep producing good, loving fruit, right? But, my legs are stiff from the cold. They'll produce good fruit over time. And so, look at this horizon. You can't see, it's all red. It's so cool. Hold on, I've got it. Wrap this tripod up. Okay, I'll put the light on me so you'll see light in a second. I might have to put it on the path to go down this. Oh, okay, this isn't. I'm glad I thought to put my backpack on. All right. So she said, I loved it. You know, you can follow someone and build a trust with them, just like even Gandalf, you know, read the Lord of the Rings a bunch of times to learn this, right? And a lot of the Narnia books will teach you this in a more simple way even, you know, is that but you gotta watch, because someone can take the crazy pill, and I'm not saying crazy, I'm saying, you know, where they turn like Saruman. Saruman was a good wizard, and then he turned bad. And I'm not saying wizard follow wizards. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, you know, like the faun. Let's say the faun in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you've ever read that, Mr. Tumnus was like a neutral faun, you know, the nicest faun Lucy's ever met. But he didn't know he was seduced to be paid by the White Witch in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And but then once he realized what he was doing, he turned back good. You know, and so there are people that actually can start good and then they get seduced by power or money or greed or fame or whatever. You know, that's like the oldest story told. You know, that's like what happened to Adam and Eve. You know, and so like if I heard by this one man, he says, I've never seen an ugly witch. Like, you can't tell by their outer appearance. They can look very sweet and nice and whatever. You know, read the Proverbs talk to you about this, but in the end they lead to death. You know, her words are cunning and sweet. There's Lady Wisdom and there's the other lady, you know. And so there's lots about that online. I don't have to go teach about that now, but what she's saying is, like, you know, people could start off and think that they're wanting to come close to God, and then they forget the one that they went all in for. They got caught off on the lesser things. C.S. Lewis says you have to put first things first in order to get second and third things. If you put second things first, you don't get the first things, and the first thing always has to be God. This is why Jesus is always teaching higher consciousness, and he says, the first commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. It has to be that way. Otherwise, you lose you lose everything. What does it profit for a man to gain the whole world, or a woman and lose their soul? It doesn't profit. Oh, look. Can you see the moon? It's really cool. It's just a sliver, though. That's why there's no light right now. All right, I'll let you go. Much love. Thanks for being here. Much love. Share and all that stuff.